This is a school project video about the book The Lost Estate. At the start of the story, Francois is living a quiet and predictable life at his family's school until Augustin Moon arrives. Moon is different from everyone else, adventurous, mysterious, and always searching for something exciting. One day, he accidentally wanders into a strange estate during a celebration and meets a girl named Yvonne. The experience feels almost unreal, and he becomes obsessed with finding the estate again. In the middle of the novel, Moon spends much of his time trying to return to the estate and reconnect with Yvonne. Francois helps him search for clues while both become caught up in the complicated relationships connected to the estate. The story begins to focus more on lost dreams, promises, and the difficulty of holding on to perfect memories. At the end, Moon finally marries Yvonne, but her happiness does not. Moon finally marries Yvonne, but their happiness does not last. He leaves because he feels responsible for helping someone from his past, and while he is gone, Yvonne dies after giving birth to their child. By the end of the novel, Moon returns, but the magical feelings he spent years chasing has disappeared. So basically, Moon arrives at Francois' school. He discovers the mysterious estate by accident. Then he meets Yvonne and falls in love with her. Francois and Moon search for the estate again. Moon reconnects with Yvonne. Moon and Yvonne get married. Moon leaves to fulfill an old promise, and Yvonne dies and Moon returns afterward. The main conflict of the story is Moon's pursuit of perfect memory and his attempt to relive the happiness he felt at the mysterious estate. The novel shows how difficult it is to hold on to dreams when reality and responsibility stand in the way. After identifying the central conflict, it becomes clear that the conflict is reflected through the major characters. Each one responds differently to dreams, responsibility, and the passage of time. Yvonne is gentle and kind. She represents the ideal that Moon is searching for and becomes a symbol of the happiness he longs to reclaim. Moon is adventurous and restless. He drives the story through his search for the mysterious estate and his desire to relive the perfect moment he experienced there. Francois is loyal and realistic. As the narrator, he helps Moon throughout the novel and provides a more grounded perspective on the events. Moon changes the most because he begins the story chasing dreams and excitement, but ends it confronting reality, loss, and responsibility. Since Moon experiences the greatest transformation, his character development helps reveal many of the larger themes Elaine Fournier explores throughout the novel. One is lost dreams. The novel explores how people chase perfect memories that can never fully return. Moon spends the story trying to hold on to a moment that was already fading the second it happened. 2 is loneliness. Many of the characters feel emotionally isolated, even when surrounded by others. The novel carries a quiet sadness, as if everyone is searching for something they cannot fully explain. 3 is reality versus fantasy. The story shows how dangerous it can be to live too deeply in dreams and illusions. Moon wants life to remain magical forever, but reality eventually destroys that fantasy. These themes are not only present in the plot, but are reflected directly through the characters' thoughts, actions, and experiences. Lost Dreams, a quote by Moon, is, "It seems to me that I had been transported into another world." But a quote from Francois is, "Someone came who took me away from all those childhood pleasures." Moon pulled Francois into a world of adventure and excitement, but in the end, that world proved disappointing and full of regret. For loneliness, a quote from Moon is, "I felt that I was no longer part of the world I had known." This shows Moon becomes emotionally distant from everyone around him, trapped between reality and his memory of the estate. A quote from Francois for loneliness is, "That night, my friend did not tell me all that happened to him on the road." This shows Moon keeps parts of himself hidden, creating distance between himself and Francois despite their friendship. For reality versus fantasy, a quote from Mon is, "Happiness had been within my reach, yet I had let it slip away." This highlights the novel's central conflict. Mon continues chasing an idealized version of life instead of fully embracing the real life he has with Yvonne and Francois. Because these themes appear repeatedly throughout the story, they help reveal the author's overall message and the lesson readers are meant to take away from the novel. The author suggests that people often chase perfect memories or ideal moments, but those experiences can never truly be recreated. Mon's search for these states shows how his obsession can pull someone away from real life. The novel encourages readers to think about how fragile happiness is and whether it is better to live in dreams or accept reality. The main lesson is that chasing the past can make you miss the present because perfect moments do not last and cannot be brought back exactly as they were. The author's message can be understood most clearly through the characters, especially Francois, whose perspective shapes how the readers experience the story. Francois is one of the most interesting characters because he is not the traditional hero. Instead, he serves as an observer who becomes deeply involved in someone else's story. His main motivation is loyalty. From the moment Mon arrives, Francois becomes attached to him and wants to understand and support him, even when Mon becomes unpredictable. He also has a quieter motivation. He wants meaning in his ordinary life, and Mon represents something larger and more exciting than his everyday world. One of Francois' strengths is his patience and awareness. He notices details others miss and tries to make sense of events as they unfold. He is also emotionally steadier than Mon, allowing him to endure everything that happens without completely falling apart. However, his main flaw is passivity. Francois often watches instead of acting. He supports Mon's choices, but rarely challenges them, even when those choices lead to pain or confusion. Because of this, he sometimes feels as though he is living life secondhand. Morally, Francois is grounded and good-hearted. He does not chase selfish desires or act recklessly. Instead, he tries to understand others and remain loyal even when situations become unclear or unfair. By the end of the story, Francois changes in a subtle but meaningful way. He becomes more aware that life does not follow the exciting patterns he once imagined through Mon. Rather than chasing adventure, he learns to accept memory, loss, and the reality that some stories do not have neat endings. While Francois provides a grounded perspective, Mon is often the source of the story's tension and frustration. The most frustrating character is Mon. His choices after finding Yvonne are difficult to watch because he finally achieves something close to happiness, yet he remains drawn toward his promise to Franz and his desires to reclaim what he lost at the estate. What makes him frustrating is that his decisions are believable. It makes sense that someone like him would continue chasing a perfect childhood-like memory instead of embracing a stable present. He treats the past as something that can still be recovered, even as it slips further away. I can relate to that mindset. I also find myself drawn to childhood memories and simpler times, even when dwelling on them does not lead anywhere productive. That is part of why Mon's choices feel realistic, even when they are painful to hear. Because of that, I cannot confidently say I would make different choices. I understand why he acts the way he does, even though his decisions ultimately lead to loss. The story is frustrating, but it is also honest about how people can become trapped trying to return to something that can never truly be recovered. Examining Mon's choices also raises the question of responsibility. Are the characters victims of circumstance, or are they responsible for their own outcomes? All of the major characters are victims of circumstance, but Mon is also responsible. Yvonne is probably the biggest victim because she becomes trapped in Mon's obsession with the past. She genuinely loves him, but she suffers because he can never fully live in the present with her. Francois is also a victim, though in a quieter way. He becomes caught up in Moan's emotional chaos and spends much of the story watching other people's dreams and losses instead of pursuing his own life. Even when Moan feels like a victim of his own personality and desires, his need to chase lost happiness controls many of his decisions, almost as if he cannot escape the memory of the estate once he experiences it. As I have said before, however, Moan is ultimately responsible for his own downfall. He consciously chooses to ignore the present and remain focused on the past. After analyzing the characters and themes, my overall opinion of the novel was shaped by both its strengths and its weaknesses. My confusion and lack of enjoyment with this book were mainly the result of the translation. I often had to reread sentences at different speeds just to understand them. The story also felt predictable. I could usually tell what was coming next, which made the reading experience feel dry and disappointing. That said, the ending was justified. I would not have been satisfied with a different conclusion because the ending reinforces the novel's central message. Moan's held on to childhood for too long, allowing it to grow like a neglected tumor. The result was sorrow and regret over the life he kept turning away from. Although the novel was written more than a century ago, its themes can still be connected to modern life. If the story took place today, technology would change everything. Moan could use phones, maps, and the internet to find Yvonne and the estate, making the mystery far less powerful. Modern culture would also make the estate feel less hidden and unreachable because people are more connected than ever before. Overall, the novel would lose much of its dreamlike atmosphere since modern life makes it easier to find people and places instead of relying on chance, memory, and fate. Looking at the story through a modern lens also highlights several real-world issues that mirror the struggles faced by the characters. The book reminds me of the modern tendency to become trapped in nostalgia and idealize the past. Many people look back on childhood or specific memories and convince themselves that those moments were better than anything happening in the present. It also connects to themes of escapism. Moan becomes more focused on a perfect memory than on the reality of his life, relationships, and responsibilities. His pursuit of the estate reflects how that mindset can pull someone away from the people and opportunities right in front of them. Overall, the novel feels like a warning about how easy it is to live in the past emotionally while life continues moving forward. Even though the novel explores meaningful ideas, my overall reading experience was not particularly enjoyable. I did not really like the book. First, many sections felt dry because the story focused more on mood and reflection than on advancing the plot. Second, it was fairly predictable. Once it becomes clear that Moan is chasing something he lost, it is not difficult to see where the story is heading. Third, the writing often felt longer than necessary. Several ideas were repeated in different ways, which made it harder to stay engaged even though the core story of itself is interesting. I would rate the book a 4 out of 10. My rating reflects both the strengths and weaknesses of the novel, which can be seen in its writing, characters, themes, and ending. The writing is descriptive and atmospheric, but it can feel slow and repetitive. While it creates a strong mood, that same focus on atmosphere often hurts the pacing. The characters are interesting, especially Moan and Francois, but they do not always feel active. Much of the story is driven by Moan's obsession rather than meaningful action or growth. The themes are the strongest part of the novel. Lost dreams, nostalgia, and the dangers of chasing the past are memorable ideas that give the story its lasting impact. The ending was predictable, but it fit the story well and reinforced its message. The novel contains thoughtful and reflective moments, but its emotional impact is mixed. It connects more on an intellectual level than as a deeply moving experience. Despite my criticisms, I can still appreciate what the novel was trying to accomplish.